Say good morning to everyone. Stephanie, I'm going to hand it over to you to do a quick roll call. Just kind of helps us know who's all here. And then if folks are able to come off video or to come on to video, if you're on the task force, we would love that this morning. So go ahead, Stephanie.
Great, thank you. I'll say good morning, everybody. Welcome. And yeah, I'm just going to go through names real quickly. If you'll just say here, and then that'll help us keep track for our minutes a little bit easier. So I'm just going to skip whom I don't see. I see Ashley. Hello. Brian Cotter is here.
I'm here.
Good morning, friend. Janelle.
I am here. I'll be on video in a little bit.
Great. Good to have you, Janelle. Chelsea, I saw you here. Am I correct? Yep. Fantastic. Dave Lee, good morning. I see you. Dr. Marquette, do I see you? Oh, yes.
Hi, I'm here.
Good morning. Brandon Miller.
I'm here. I'll be on video in about 30 minutes to get to where I'm supposed to be. So
Fantastic. Drive safely if you're driving. Elizabeth Montoya, good morning. I see you. Kelly Abbott. I don't see Kelly yet. Okay, Michelle Bradley. Not yet. All right. Anna Cole.
Good morning. I'm here. I'm sorry, I won't be able to join via camera today.
Thank you, Anna. Dennis, I see you. Good morning. Dave Hayes. I don't see Dave. Kevin Lash, I saw you. Kevin, where are you? Yes, good morning. There he is. Great. Chase. I don't see Chase yet. All right. Beth, our vice chair, good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Becky, good morning. I see you as well.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you.
And Lynette was joining me in dancing earlier this morning. Thank you, Lynette. Good to see you. All right. And then Norma. I did not see Norma yet. Okay. So Chase, I think I've gone through everybody and it looks like we're missing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 members so far. Is that what you have?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, great. And I have a note by those, so we can talk about, or we can note that later.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we're ready to roll?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks all for being here. We're going to kick off today actually with a quick introduction of someone I'm very excited to introduce you to. So Doris, if you could wave real quick. Doris is going to be joining us as my co-facilitator in this work moving forward. And some of you might know Doris, and some of you might not. Doris came to me by way of introduction through her work with us on the mandatory reporting task force. And so she's based in Indianapolis. I'm going to actually, I have a little bit of a bio and typically I just give voice to it, but Doris is such an incredible human and there's so much that I'm actually going to read a few of those things so that I don't mess up anything of the wealth of expertise that she's bringing to the table today. But in addition to that, Doris has also quickly become a good friend, which is really nice. And just through the vibes that we have on the mandatory reporting, her incredible knowledge and expertise around child welfare issues all across the board, and just her passion for this work makes her a natural fit and leader in this space as a facilitator. And so when we started talking and she was talking about her capacity to support this, it was kind of a no-brainer for us and also for Stephanie and her team to bring Doris on. So I just wanted to name that. Doris, don't blush too much over there. I see her. She was like, you don't need to read my bio. I said, yes, I do. So I'm going to read a couple of things. And then Doris, I would love for you to just give a little bit more context as to the where and where you've been and kind of what you bring to this space. But she's been in this space for more than 25 years in health and human services, skilled advocate for equity and justice. I've seen that firsthand, so I can also double down on that. Her diverse professional background includes executive leadership, consulting, and on-the-ground experience in public, private, and nonprofit. Includes working with public and nonprofit organizations to develop and implement practices to reduce disproportionate outcomes for historically marginalized populations, including leading strategy development to prioritize equity and justice, designing and facilitating equity workshops for healthcare and human service organizations, and the evaluation piece on updating programs and policies to promote more equitable organizational practices and client outcomes. So the incredible work she's done around the equity piece of the incredibly complex work and mandatory reporting, I think will translate really well here. So Doris, welcome. Super excited for you to be part of the team and would love for you to come off mute if you want and give a little bit more context and welcome to the group.
Yeah, no, it's just, I mean, I put it in the chat. It's just a pleasure to join with all of you. Looking forward to collaborating and partnering and ultimately producing a product that we can all be proud of in this work. As Trace mentioned, I'm super passionate about all of the things related to ensuring the well-being of kids, families, communities, which includes the equity work, but just happy to be joining with all of you and looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better and again, just supporting this work.
Doris, do you mind giving a little context as to where you've been professionally? I know that you've got a little bit of a list, so I'd love for you to just pop off a few of those because I know a lot of folks are familiar with those.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So currently I do consulting work for a firm called Health Management Associates. It's a little bit of a misnomer because the space in which I thrive really is in that child welfare and human services space. And I do a myriad of work there, but I kind of cut my teeth in the consulting. I'm working reverse chronologically. I cut my teeth in the consulting world at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, working in their child welfare strategy group, having come from a background of fairly substantial public child welfare work. I worked for Indiana's Child Welfare Agency for just over a decade before I went and joined Annie E. Casey. And then I have a myriad of nonprofit mostly, but also some for-profit work in the what I would consider the child welfare adjacent and broader health and human services field.
Thanks, Doris. Stephanie,
My
anything
pleasure.
to add? And then would love if anybody, you can just say welcome, Doris, or if you have any questions for her, would just love to open up space. But Stephanie, anything to add?
No, we're just grateful that you're here with us, Doris, and I think we're ready to get going.
Cool. Okay. All right. Thanks, y'all. Okay, so today's agenda, we've really got two topics at hand. One, and they're both revisiting topics. I'm going to run the conversation around the term runaway, where we'll revisit where we kind of left off there. And then I'm going to hand it over to Doris, and Doris is going to run that conversation, revisiting the directive around the efficiency of quantitative data, where we're going to have we're going to go a little bit deeper on the last activity that we did, where we can kind of get you all's brain trust in this and make sure that we're really capturing what you all are saying. And we're also going to be taking a little bit of a poll so that we can kind of just capture where the group is collectively. You know, again, want to bring out that we're not driving towards consensus on these things. We're just driving towards accurate representation of where the group is overall and where the conversations ebb and flow. So that's kind of the purpose in taking sort of a poll so that we can capture that accurately in the report. And you'll hear more about that in a little bit. But first, I want to start in this conversation around runaway. So we've got about 45 minutes. I don't know that we'll need 45 minutes, but we have it if we need it. I know a number of you on the call. I was really hoping that the folks that spoke up last time were going to be rejoining today to ensure that your perspectives were captured here. And I want to talk about the why to make sure that we're regrounded in this. If you remember the last meeting, I had COVID, so I did not get a chance to speak to this. But Jen was talking a little bit about why we're talking about the language piece. And really, I want to clarify one thing. When we talk around any potential shift in the language from the term runaway to anything more broad or just anything different, what we're talking about here is not an official recommendation. What it is A, the way this group uses that language as we continue these conversations around the kids that we're talking around, and B, the way that we write this report and frame the language as the work of the task force. So we're not looking to upend at this point all the systems, and any system uses the term runaway. We're talking around sort of the value statement of this group as to how we talk about and think about these kids, as we talk around all the different nuances and challenges that we know that goes into when a child is missing from care or has run away. And so I just wanted to like make sure that that was clear as to the why and how that language would be used and in what spaces. And then I want to also bring forth as to why we brought this up as a reminder. So two things. It was brought up first and foremost by multiple task force members. And then what was interesting to me is that when we brought in the folks from the University of Nebraska, it was explicitly one of their suggestions and a next step for this task force. And so when I went back and looked at those notes, I wanted to bring forth a couple of the points, and I appreciate y'all letting me kind of ground you in this before we start the discussion around it. So when she talked about the next steps, and she talked around this phrasing of runaway, a few things that I thought were helpful were, let's see here. One, the data that she used, nowhere in there differentiated at all away from the word runaway, and in AFGARs, the data that they were using in that presentation, and she noted that. And that felt, when she was talking as a researcher, she said that felt problematic because they didn't understand the problem, right? As they were talking around these kids. They didn't understand like the different nuances of like what the data was, and people were asking that of like, well, how much of this number of runaways is this particular case? And they said, we don't know, because it was all housed under this word runaway. So she named that as an issue. The second thing is that around this piece of reality is once they're missing from care, you know, was it their own free will, own decision? Were they coerced? We just know that they're missing from care. And then she was saying, you know, let's say that a child does run away. Their characterization of runaway puts the onus on the child. And that's what we got into in that last meeting, was really when the term runaway is saying that this kid, and I know Kevin and Brian, we talked last meeting where you said, well, the kid did make that decision. Her push on that was really around, first and foremost, seeing kids as a vulnerable population, regardless of the kid that you're talking around. And so that was her kind of piece there. So I just wanted to bring those two up. I also wanted to give a chance, Stephanie, I'm putting you in the role as a participant here, and not as because you were one of the participants that brought this up from your own perspective as well. And so I just wanted to name that I didn't give you a heads up, because I'm putting my facilitator hat on and putting you in the role as participant. But I also know that you brought this up from your experience as well. And so I wanted to give you a chance if you wanted to speak to that before we kind of flip this and invite Kevin and Brian back in and ensure that we also include your perspective. So again, wanting to get to a place where we just kind of generally understand people's appetite for this conversation. And the term that we're kind of couched around right now is children missing from care. So that was the recommendation. So I just want to make sure I'm clear on the sort of like what we talked about. And then I know that there are a couple of other opportunities to talk around different language. So Stephanie, I wanted to give you a chance to speak back.
No, I appreciate that, Trace. And, you know, I think that my concern with using the word runaway really is about two things. One is about the stereotypes that I think exist about kids in care, right? Be it foster care or if they're in group homes. You know, when I read literature, and I've been in this business for nearly 3 decades now, right? I think there are these stereotypes that foster kids or kids in care are troublesome, right? Or troubled, that they're almost, without overgeneralizing, that they're bad kids, right? That they're there for a reason. And especially, I think that becomes true as youth become older. I think that there is sort of this perception of youth in care that when they're younger, you're a victim. As you get older, you're there because you could be a troublesome person, right? And my concern is that if these are some of the misconceptions that exist, right? What are our efforts as a community to really either deter these kids from running and or to relocate them, right? And bring them back. And I compare it to my other world where I used to be in criminal prosecution. And, we dealt with children that were abducted, right? Kids that were kidnapped, kids that went missing, and the response by the systems, right? Whether it's human services, law enforcement, was dramatically different in cases where we labeled kids as missing, right, from regular families, if you will, versus kids that we see leaving the system from care. And so that really, this dichotomy in the treatment of youth, at the end of the day, in my opinion, they're all missing and they're all vulnerable. And they're all vulnerable because they're children at the end of the day, period, right? The vulnerability doesn't change whether, right? I mean, it just doesn't. You are subject to being on the streets without an adult presence and all that means that you need to do to survive. So that is where my comments really originated, is I just feel there's this distinction in the treatment of missing children. And again, going back to my initial concerns about stereotypes, I actually think, ironically, the children who go missing from care are some of our most vulnerable children, right? Because they are children that have been put in placement. They either have behavioral health disorders, they're suffering from intellectual disabilities, they're children that have been abused and neglected, right? And placed away from their families. And so at some level, I almost feel the opposite is true of the stereotype, that they are probably our most vulnerable kids. And when they go missing, they deserve that equal attention from our systems, not less. So those are the issues that have been rattling around in my brain on this issue. So thanks for letting me share.
Yeah, and Stephanie, appreciate you letting me put you on the spot. I've been trying to change my approach as to how I bring you in as a participant. And so I was like, I'm not going to give you a heads up, but I appreciate you speaking back to how that originally surfaced. Janelle, I'm seeing you in the chat. And so I wanted to bring you in, if possible, to kind of speak to your comment, if possible.
Yeah, and sorry guys, I'll have my camera on here shortly. I was just listening to everything that Stephanie was saying, and I absolutely agree just on the vulnerability part. And I had put the statistic in there that a child on the run, 1 in 3 children on the run within 48 hours are approached by a human trafficker or attempted to be groomed or anything like that. So when we think of the streets of Denver, when we think of Urban Peak, all of those areas down there, it just adds such a high compounding vulnerability to these children. Then you add other things in there, like maybe LGBTQ identification, things like that. They really find those things to prey on. And so I absolutely agree that the vulnerability is at an all-time high, whether they were taken, went missing, or ran. There's some type of vulnerability there. They are wanting something, needing something, struggling, yearning for something, and somebody that is not healthy is going to help them try to fill that in a way that is not good for them. So I do agree with those parts of that. And I just wanted to add to that. That's all.
Thanks, Janelle. I appreciate that. And I know that you spoke up in the last meeting as well. So I appreciate you kind of like bringing in the nuances to your perspective around both sides of this kind of conversation. Anyone else want to kind of talk around again? I think the other thing I want to name is that I went down a research rabbit hole as to who was using this language, runaway language versus missing from care. Missing from care, I'm saying, is because that is the largest theme I saw across any white paper, any large kind of national organization that talks around children missing, and they differentiate within children missing around children that have run away, children, right, like the different buckets of why that kid might be missing, but they house that conversation first and foremost in, again, the vulnerability of a child is missing. So I do think it's important to understand that, people still get specific when they can around the why, right? Or what might be behind that. So there's that context, but the larger context and the larger language is around a child is missing and a child is vulnerable. And that is the concern. So Stephanie, appreciate you also outlining the systems piece of that. Anyone else want to jump in, want to make sure that we're leaving space? Sergeant Cotter and Kevin, I know that y'all jumped in last time, and I'm hoping my clarification around the where this language helps spark kind of different things. I know y'all had some time to think about it. So Sergeant Cotter, I'm seeing you come off mute, so I'm going to go to you first.
Yeah, so I certainly agree with all of the vulnerable aspects to this. I think, and I'm not really hung up on the phrase that we choose internally as a group. I think that the perspective I want to point through just helps us focus. So when we think about a child who's missing from care, are we talking about kidnapping? Because if we're talking about kidnapping, that's not really a conversation for this group. We have laws around that. We have an active, like a proactive law enforcement response to that. If this kid has been seized even by a custodial or a non-custodial parent, maybe in violation of some court orders, we have processes for that. That's not really, I believe, the focus of this group. The focus of this group, as I understand it, is really what do we need to do to help kids not make that decision to leave placement? What is it that we can do to understand their cause for wanting to leave? And maybe it's a third party, but I think we'll find that a lot of it is really circumstantial and their life experience that causes them to want to leave. But it is at the end of the day, it's the decision that they are making, which is the sort of defining factor of runaway. They choose to leave the program. That does not, in my mind, diminish their vulnerability. It does not diminish the risk that exists when they're out on the street. What it does, though, is it focuses our effort to say, what is it that we're looking at to help this child not make that decision? Because that is not a put up a fence to keep strangers from passing by conversation. That is a let's understand the child's experience. So that's why I think that the runaway is appropriate, even more appropriate in this task force than in others. And again, I don't at any point believe that the child is not vulnerable out there, or that the child is not a victim to the circumstances that exist in their life that cause this. So.
Thanks, Sergeant Carter, for your comments. It sounds like, from what I'm hearing, with you, what you started was you're not going to get too hung up on the framing. You just want to make sure that we're still talking around the top, like specifically around the topic at hand, which is how can we reduce, children, that are leaving their care, right? Leaving an adult that is caring for them, whether that is in an out-of-home placement in home, et cetera. So am I capturing that right? That you're not too hung up on the general framing, but you want to make sure that we're not losing sight of what the directive is for the task force. Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, this is Norma. You can't see me, but I'm on it.
I can hear you, Norma. All good.
So I think that you actually make some really, really good points about the difference between these words and things. And I think, honestly, I think your points are really well taken. The thing that I think is the issue is the the stigma that comes around with the word runaway. So for example, when we talk about kids that have run away from placement, I think people automatically think that, I don't know that this is intentional, but I think that folks automatically think the child doesn't really want treatment right now, or, they just don't want to listen to adults, or, things like that. And so we lose then focus of what you're talking about, which is the vulnerability of the child, the reasons why they left placement, all of those things. And I think that in all fairness for law enforcement, I think when police officers hear that the child ran away, that automatically, they have a certain way of thinking about that child then. And I don't know that we go into high gear to look for that child and try to figure out what happened. I don't know if this all makes sense, but I'm not sure that I'm articulating super well.
No, I think that's great, Norma. I appreciate your points. And I think, as we really our task within this task force too, is also how we capture this conversation for this report, how you all kind of wrestled with this and the questions you were asking, the variety of perspectives. So there's no right or wrong, Norma. I don't want, you're being perfectly eloquent in your words, and I appreciate that. And I think you're just kind of naming the challenges that you see in the language piece. And so that's really what we're trying to get after, is that, again, just trying to capture the conversation around this and the way that the task force is thinking around these kids as we think about the variety of challenges. Kevin, would love to, actually, no, sorry. Janelle, I saw you in the chat. Thanks, Alexis. Janelle, if you want to come off, I didn't see your hand raised, but I saw you in the chat. So Janelle, I'll hand it to you.
Sorry, I think I raised my hand and I don't really know what's
Oh,
happening.
you're good. You're good.
So I hear what Norma's saying, and I do tend to lean more on what Sergeant Cotter was saying, purely because, and I completely agree with Norma, that there are those challenges with officers. A lot of, street cops, things like that. I do think that there's definitely those officers out there. What I will tell you is that specifically the officers that I've worked with in my time that hear this, they understand the vulnerabilities. And a lot of times when I think that maybe certain kiddos and officers get an idea about them, I think that there's a long history. And that's when certain services need to come into place. Case management, DHS needs to be putting more services in place. There needs to be people looking for them. There needs to be a safe person in their life to reach out to when they're on the run. I personally have girls who are on the run and reach out to me the entire time. And so I think in order to bridge that gap from the things that Sergeant Cotter was saying, because I do agree, when I hear missing, I think kidnapping, and that's completely separate. And when I hear runaway, I hear different, but I don't take it as a negative thing. And so I don't know if the way to bridge that gap is for training with maybe street officers who are responding to runaway calls or things like that, to get on that preventative side, to change the mindset and give more training on these things, rather than just changing the outlook as a whole, because I don't want people to get the wrong idea that maybe haven't had that training or been put in this situation more. I'm struggling how I'm trying to say this. I'm thinking that there's a lot of education and training that could go into this, especially to street cops, when it comes to this stuff, rather than just changing language for the masses. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Janelle, it does make sense. I mean, what that comes up for me is almost like you're talking around tucking that into, including that in like an implicit bias training. If I'm an officer and I hear the word runaway, what comes up for me, right?
Yeah.
And what assumptions am I making, and what and almost like some sort of like exercise around helping officers, and I'm picking on officers, Brian, because that's the language she used. So I'm not trying to, but in this,
sorry, Brian.
no, but like in this particular illustration, it's like you're kind of saying, what would it look like to actually do a sort of implicit bias training around the term runaway and how we think around these kids.
I agree. And also protocols, like when you get this runaway call, what are you doing? What are the places you are looking? And so, in my line of work, and I work with a lot of amazing officers that go the extra mile to find these kiddos because of their compounding vulnerabilities. And so what are you doing? Are you checking if there's a DHS case? Are you checking with friends? Are you, looking at social media, like maybe ideas to go through to look at that? Running away is also not a crime. And so it adds all these other things that I think officers can do, and not so much willing to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Janelle. And Lynette and Norma, I see you in the chat too, giving us some other examples. This is similar for caseworkers, for placement providers.
I agree with Norma.
Yeah. And Norma, appreciate that. I'm gonna I would love for the folks in the chat to kind of come off but I'm seeing Dave and then Renee, and then we'll throw it to Norma and Jenna. Go ahead, Dave.
Hi, everything that people are saying definitely resonates with me when we're focusing on what this task force is put together for. But I'm not hung up on the definition, children missing from care. Okay, fine. But then I will get hung up on, all right, what's the definition of children? What's the age group that we're looking at? What does that term missing mean? And then when you say care, I thought, Tracy made a comment there around kids that run away from home and stuff like that. And I'm like, I thought this was really a focus on like out of home placements and things like that. But then I'm like, all right, we need to make sure we understand what each
I was
word,
trying to differentiate between a facility and a foster home in that comment. So that might have just been my language, but that was out of home placement, meaning like in a home, foster home versus a facility. So go ahead.
Totally
Sorry.
agree with that. I mean, I just want to make sure that we are clear on what each of those words mean in our definition.
I appreciate that call. I mean, it's this idea of like ensuring that, you know, when I went into the National Center for Exploited and Missing Children, they had a definition for each of those. When they use the term missing from care, but then they talk around, if we use this runaway, we're talking about this. If we talk about children, we're talking about this. So I hear you on the definition piece to ensure that it doesn't get lost. Renee and then Sergeant Cotter.
Yeah, thanks. Just kind of building from what everyone else has said, and this to me seems like a classic example where the term itself isn't necessarily pejorative or doesn't have a lot of bias in it, other than if you were talking about are they running or walking or things like that. But because it's been associated with a group that has stigma around it, then the term people brings up stigma, and I feel like this is a phenomenon that happens in so many areas where there's stigma associated with the term, even if the term itself isn't inherently stigmatizing. So then the term gets changed. But to, I forget, was it Janelle's point? I think without that training piece and without the sensitivity piece, then the new term just tends to take on the bias as well. So I don't have a strong feeling in this case. I'd be fine with either, but I just wanted to point that out. I've worked in the mental health field for decades, and that I feel like we're often changing the terms because there's lots of stigma in mental health, and so we change the term. But the stigma is really associated with people's feelings about folks with mental health. It's not the term causing the stigma, and so then the new term just takes on the stigma, and we kind of keep shifting. So I think without the other efforts to change the stigma and changing the word itself doesn't do a whole lot in the end.
Appreciate that piece. So I'm starting to see a thread a little bit around, we're talking about language, but now we're talking around how do we around this training piece and around how do we address these almost stigmas within these systems as we talk around whatever particular language that we might land on. So appreciate that, Renee. Sergeant Cotter and Kevin, just because I've heard from you two, I'm going to pause just for a second because I see Lynette, and Lynette, I haven't heard your voice today. So I'm going to bring you into the conversation if you don't mind.
No worries. I was just thinking, I remember when people would say, oh, she's bipolar, like she is bipolar. He's a runaway. Instead of he ran away. She suffers from bipolar disorder. It is that mind shift that I think that we need to focus on. No matter what we call it in this group, it is not going to change what society, their use of the word runaway, but we can start the movement of not labeling them as a runaway, but labeling them as a child that ran away or a child that left placement. And I almost prefer left placement over missing, because I think there is a general consensus of the difference between missing, somebody who's been abducted or kidnapped, versus a child who left placement, who is now at risk of sex trafficking and being victimized and all of those other horrible things that happens to these youth. And so that's my 2 cents worth.
I'd put it at least 5 cents minimum. Thanks, Lynette. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Sergeant Cotter, then Kevin, and then I'll bring in some folks from the chat.
I was just going to echo some of the comments about this sort of mindset piece, that whatever recommendations the group ends up making, we really should make sure that we are specific in our recommendation on training. So if we believe that there's a deficiency in law enforcement, and I agree with a lot of the sentiments about law enforcement's beliefs here, and I specifically wanted to note Jenna's comment about her experience with county by county experiences, and that happens in all areas of law enforcement. But if we really feel like there's a piece that's missing and education is needed, we should be specific in saying this education needs to be provided, so that we can start to change that culture. Because for law enforcement officers who do look at runaways as some sort of problem child, as a default answer, then they really are uneducated, and we need to do better about that. I think that's going to help us in this, this group's goals as a specific example. But any other areas where we're diving in and saying there's a stigma that's happening, we should be explicit in our recommendations about how we think we should overcome that stigma.
Sergeant Carter, I appreciate you just like naming the can we just name what this is, which is I'm seeing a lot of head nods across the screen. I'm curious, I'm going to pause us for a second on that piece of an explicit call out as far as I want to back up from the word recommendation, because we haven't discussed, if we would move into official recommendations with this group, but let's say that we want to really put our hands around this idea in the report of the importance of training and addressing the bias that might exist around this term runaway, around these kids, right? Would anyone disagree with that as a call out? And I'm just trying to broaden our language from the word recommendation, because I don't want us to get stuck on, okay, is that a recommendation? Is that a theme? I'm seeing a lot of head nods. So anyone that would disagree with what Sergeant Cotter's saying around the training piece. Lynette, I'm seeing your head shake. Okay.
Would you say what you just said again? Because I didn't get it.
Yeah, sorry, Kevin.
You heard a lot of words. It turned into a word salad for me. I couldn't understand what your point was.
Sergeant Cotter was saying, it sounds like there might be a recommendation around the need for training, around, the stigma piece, the bias piece around these kids, right? And so I was just saying, I'm going to, for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to zoom out from the word recommendation, but broadly speaking, it seems like this group has is comfortable with this idea that is of importance to you all, that it is addressed specifically around the need for training at different systems level as it relates to stigmas that might exist, biases that might exist. So I was just making sure that was something that was felt across the group. That make more sense? He's like, yeah, okay. Brandon Miller, I'm going to bring you in, and we've got about 10 more minutes for this conversation. So Brandon, go ahead.
Hey guys. So one of the things, I don't really get caught up in what we want to call it. It's not a big issue to me one way or the other. But one of the things I do want to bring up, at least from an out-of-home placement scenario, there really is two types of what you would call runaways. There are kids that are in a irrational state of mind in crisis, that is a trauma response, that aren't really trying to run away. Their reaction is like more of a walk away, leaving, exiting. And then there are kids that are trying to run away and trying to get away from a facility or premeditated. It's more premeditated approach. And I think that the approach, or at least the solutions to the two different types of kids are two very different things. They get lumped into one general category. And I think that's part of the issue when we're talking about solutions, because I don't necessarily consider kids that are emotionally unstable, that they react in a flight mode, necessarily runaways per se. It can lead to a runaway situation if not dealt with, which I think is part of the challenge and issue here. But I don't necessarily think they start in the same place, if that makes sense.
Definitely makes sense. Thanks for bringing that perspective, Brandon. Kevin, is your hand up still, or I didn't know?
Yeah, it's still up.
Okay, go ahead.
Although Renee made a lot of my point for me, I appreciate her saying that the terms have a way of just morphing, et cetera. The language is important because you want to be accurate. It's not that I'm so crazy over runaway. I particularly don't like missing from care, because to me, that's just kind of a code word that really doesn't call it what it is. I think Ms. Montoya mentioned the word what we call elopement. Well, that's good with me. That's accurate. But missing from care to me is not accurate and is way too general. I think most of you know, I might have mentioned, but just so you know who I am. My son's run away 45 times, including from he either ran away or attempted to run away from all the 14 facilities he was placed through his teenage years, from the age of 11 to 17. And in fact, at 19 now, he's run away again and is sitting in jail. So I have some experience with running away. I don't read any of the stigmas that everybody else is describing. I mean, to me, most people kind of got it, that this is a kid with problems, that he wasn't, there were certain people that, police officers and stuff that didn't have experience with him, fair enough, but I don't see where he was treated poorly because of that. At the end of the day, the onus really is on the child. I mean, at the end of the day, there's been probably 20, 25 therapists try to convince my son it's a really bad idea to run away, and yet he's continued to run away. At the end of the day, we've got to convince that child that this is really a bad coping mechanism. And in my case, that's never been successful. So at the end of the day, it really is on the child. It's, there's no one else in the world that can do it, in spite of our best efforts as adults.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate you always willing to share your story, and appreciate that perspective, particularly as it relates to your son and your family. Want to make sure I'm making space for anybody else. I mean, this is a complex conversation, not trying to dial into one piece. You've kind of, as a group, surfaced a number of things that I think will be really valuable as we capture the things that you all have really wrestled with in this conversation. Doris, want to give you a chance to jump in on kind of some fresh eyes to this group, what you're hearing. Want to give you an opportunity as well if you'd like to.
Yeah, I think that I'm certainly hearing the themes that you surface, Trace, and one around, I think many of you are not so much hung up on the language, and sort of could go either way with respect to continuing to use the language around runaway. I think that if there is a shift to something different, really making sure that that it's narrowly focused around the population that we're specifically talking about, and kind of heard some reticence around this missing from care language that for some of you felt too broad, but also a recognition that the term runaway has for some negative connotations, and that stigma results in a different level of priority, potentially, whether that's intentional or not, to find the youth, to label the youth. So I certainly picked up on that theme. I think the thing that I would add, just in my own experience, is that you don't always know at the outset whether a child has gone missing as a result of their own volition. And when we talk about some of these youth, given any intellectual or developmental delays, this idea around decision and whether they quote unquote really chose to run away, I think is not a complete description of what happened when you think about their capacity, their intellectual capacity. And so we want to make sure that we are, I think, considering and thinking about kids who have the relative ability to make a decision to leave. And I think this gets back to what Brandon was saying about kids who are making a choice to actually run away versus that's like a more thoughtful, planned decision versus, or I think you used premeditated, Brandon, versus a child who is in the moment deciding to leave that particular environment. I think that there is another category of kids who I think I here's a little bit where my legal brain is coming in, where I think about their decision-making capacity, if that is, it's certainly limited by youth, but it also may be further limited by, again, any intellectual or other developmental disabilities that could inhibit their ability to really make an active, conscious choice about leaving a facility. And so I think we want to be considering the unique needs of those kids and make sure that whatever definition gets used captures them as well. I don't know if I went on a rambling, I don't know what word I was going to add. I don't know if I just rambled on, but those are some of the thoughts and reflections that I had hearing all of you share today.
Not a ramble, Doris. I appreciate you bringing in that perspective. I'm seeing Renee and Janelle. So let's do Renee, then Janelle. And then Stephanie would also see your note in the chat. So I was just going to see if you'd give a little voice to that as well as to how you see that connection. Go ahead, Renee.
Okay, I think Janelle is first, but I'll be quick. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Doris. And to me, I feel like it goes back to sort of the associations people might have put on the description of someone who has run, because, you know, in my mind, and I think at least in some others I've worked with, I think we assume that if somebody runs, they may not have very good decisional making ability. So it's interesting because I feel like it goes back to maybe different ways we all kind of have come to view the term more than just something that automatically comes with it. So, you know, again, I don't have a strong feeling about that term versus others. I do think the training piece is important. I did just want to go back to a comment someone else made earlier, though. I do think it's important that we aren't, whatever term we use, if we do go with, you know, something in the runaway realm, not just saying that these kids are runaways, but, you know, children who have run, you know, just the point was made about, you know, bipolar disorder. We used to say someone is bipolar as if that's kind of their whole identity versus somebody with bipolar disorder. So wanted to bring that up again.
Yeah, Renee, I definitely want to put a pin in that in the way that I think Lynette I saw a lot of head nods when I think it was Lynette made that kind of distinction, and then Renee as well. So it might not be so much that we land on a term that everyone feels comfortable with, but it is how we use this language in, you know, are these kids runaways or are they children who have run from care, right? And so I appreciate that kind of that difference there. Janelle, I'm going to come to you. Yeah, person first language, Doris. I used this example before, but it was the example that when I was a teacher, I remember a parent, you know, who talked about her son Down syndrome kid versus a kid who has Down syndrome. She was like, we're talking about my child first. And she really called out some staff in a meeting. And I was like a 23-year-old teacher. And I just remember sitting there being like, okay, she was like, this is my kid. And yes, my kid does have Down syndrome, but first and foremost, this is my child. So, so I appreciate that piece. I think Janelle, sorry, go ahead, Janelle.
So a few things, just as I'm seeing all this kind of unfold, is I have what I think should be put in, but I also kind of feel like there's a big hindrance to make any of these things we're talking about happen. And so one thing that was said in the chat was it's, you know, county by county is the issue, right? Because Denver does something one way, then Jeffco does it another. And we're talking this on law enforcement, on DHS response, all of it. There's no like real statewide way that you do it. That's why we get stigmas against DHS and law enforcement, like, oh, we love Jeffco, but we hate Denver, or this or that, because someone had a bad experience and their personal experience drives them to create that stigma. And then it just goes out into the wild, right? And it becomes something. And I just think it really comes back to this training and making a statewide something that is universal. And I had put in the chat, I mean, obviously my area is human trafficking, but there was such a statewide effort of education, language, things like that, that people aren't thinking of trafficking as, I'm hearing less people use the word prostitute, slut, hoe, all those things. I'm hearing all of that less because of the statewide, just huge global recognition and education around that issue. What I don't understand is why we can't do that around this. to change that stigma. People are cringing when they see that on the street. Now they're worried about their safety. We've changed the narrative. And so I don't understand why we're not doing that for kids too. We're not, do you see what I'm trying to say here? When you just do that, when you put the effort in and it changes it. And with that, like when it comes to just the high risk factor gauge, when everybody's talking about, Doris said, we don't know why they ran. And I think Brandon said it too. Or they just having like maybe a manic moment, does this child have mental health issues? Was it premeditated? Were they being abused and they couldn't take it anymore? Like what was happening? Do they have an addiction and they were jonesing and left? There's so many different things. And that's why I think there needs to be some type of protocol that when a run report is called in by parents, facility, foster home, that there's a checkbox. When we recover children of human trafficking, we have something called an HRV tool, which is a high risk verification tool to checkbox these things to rise them to a certain level of high risk factor. So we know how to respond and what to put in place. Why aren't we doing that for runaways? Just, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's something that we could absolutely develop and make and push out and train. But at the same time, running away is not a crime. And there's no such thing as the runaway police. So then there's also this, no one's going and looking for them. They're clearly screaming for help, whatever the situation is, why they ran. They're screaming for help and then no one's looking for them. What does that do to the kid when no one comes after them? What does it do to them internally? And what are we doing to change that? There isn't enough staff at DPD or DCSO or Jeffco or Adams or wherever to just have a runaway police, right? It's hard. And so what are we doing at the state level to make sure that there's funding for things like that? What are we also doing on the other side to support police to make them feel empowered to do those things? And so I think it's a bigger conversation than that. We can't just put things in place and then not give people the means to do it and support them at the same time. Okay, there's my 2 cents.
I'm bumping it up to 5 cents as well, Janelle. Appreciate that perspective. Lynette, I'm going to come back to you, and then I'm going to, I think we've had this is a really rich discussion, a ton to pull out of this as far as themes, a lot of folks that haven't spoken today as well. So I just want to name that we'll have an opportunity for you to kind of give feedback around what you're thinking. But just really appreciate you all kind of diving into this conversation and all the different layers that have surfaced. Lynette, going to come to you, and then we're going to take a few-minute break. And Doris, I need to chat with you around a quick pivot we're going to make for the next conversation. And so we'll give folks a 5-minute break after Lynette. So go ahead.
I was just going to talk about a situation that just occurred this weekend. Mesa County has a 9-year-old placed in another county in a QRTP. That's the residential treatment level. One of the reasons that we got custody of this young man is he was, according to law enforcement, a chronic runaway. He has autism. He is an escape artist. I mean, we put bars on the windows, we put a fence in, we did everything to try to keep this young boy at home. And he would literally get a screwdriver and unscrew the windows to be able to get out and then leave. And he goes into other people's houses and puts himself in really dangerous situations. Law enforcement from this other county called us at midnight last night and wanted us to come get him because they're tired of looking for him. Because he had ran away 4 times, like it's his fault that he's running away, right? That's where the stigma for the label runaway really comes in. And that's why it's important that we're careful about how we use our language and that we remember that these youth may not have control over their behaviors. And so that was just my last food for thought. We can't keep the label that he's just a runaway. He's a whole lot more than that. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynette. Thanks for bringing in that story. Stephanie, and I apologize, I was going to come to you just for that one the piece you left in the chat of the connections you see to the larger conversation happening around raising the age. So just wanted to give you one chance there, and then we'll take a quick break.
Yeah, it was really no more than that. It's just interesting that as we look at law enforcement and juvenile laws in general, right? Just how much nod has been given to the fact that juveniles' brains are not fully developed, right? And that is especially so when kids have been exposed to extraordinary traumas, right? Brain science has come such a long way. And so to me, it's just interesting that we do see a movement towards acknowledgement of that fact, and that we're having the same conversation in the child welfare space feels to me very congruent. It's acknowledging that science has shown us and proven to us certain things about how juveniles' brains develop, what inhibits that development, and consequently what decisions they can or cannot make knowingly, if you will. So that was it.
I appreciate that, Stephanie. Helpful context. I just saw that in the chat. I want to make sure we gave it a second. So we're gonna again, really appreciate the conversation here. I know that there's no pretty bow to tie on this conversation. There's a lot to glean from it, a lot of layers, and really appreciate folks just kind of jumping in with a variety of perspectives, and certainly welcome you all to continue as we continue to build this report over the time of the work of this task force. There'll be more opportunities to kind of weigh in around how we're framing these conversations and these nuances that you all spoke to today. So just really appreciate that. Go
Can
ahead.
I say one thing real quick before we take a break?
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's one thing that hasn't been addressed. We're all talking about what everyone's doing wrong, what we're doing wrong, what needs to change, all of that. Most of the faces on here work in the field with high-risk kids and see high-risk things. And I think that we need to recognize too that like this is hard. They are hard. And I feel like that's something that we tiptoe around. We keep talking about how we all need to do better. And I think that we can't fully take the accountability off of them because that's how they learn, right? But this is hard stuff. And I feel like that's something we also don't talk about. And so if there is a training developed, like we need to talk about those things. Like it's okay to get annoyed. I mean, I don't know how many times I've gone to a recovery and I got punched, I got tackled, I got spit on, I got kicked. You know what I mean? It's really hard to not react to that. It's hard. And so I think those are things that we need to talk about too, is how hard it is on the professionals and the parents and the foster parents and, all of these other people working in this, because eventually it does become a lot. And so what are we doing for ourselves to keep ourselves fresh and respond properly and all of that? Because if we're not okay, they're not going to be okay, and neither is our response.
So now an excellent point to send us off into a break, which is just calling back to center the humanity in this conversation, the humanity in this group, in these kids and these families, and just the challenges. So just really kind of appreciate that, and hope as we take a quick break that folks can take a deep breath, because these conversations are a lot, and I appreciate you naming it, that everyone on this call is here because of their intersection in this work, or it's also in their life, in their home, in their family. So just really appreciate that, Janelle. Thank you. I'm going to give folks 5 minutes. I think it's really important for you all to go get some water, take a deep breath. So 9:11, we'll come back and we'll start the conversation with Doris, and we'll go from there. Thanks, y'all. Let's move forward. If folks are able to come back on video, would love that for this next discussion. Doris, one thing I want to say real quick is that I'm kind of summarizing in my brain to make sure that I say back to you all kind of our next steps in that previous conversation. So I'm going to come back to that at the end of this call. I just want to name that, but I do want to get into this data piece with you all so that we make sure we get to a good stopping point. So we'll kind of come back and summarize what I heard in that conversation and how we're moving forward. And then also, if there are members of the public that are on, I do see a couple folks. If you are hoping to provide public comment at the end of this meeting, at any time, please just drop me a chat in the chat to say that, so that we can reserve enough time at the end. So Doris, I'm going to hand it to you.
All right, fantastic. So we are going to pivot to the second part of our agenda, and resume the conversation that was had last time around the quantitative data. I know you had some robust discussion, had an opportunity to do some breakout group work to identify where there might be some opportunities to enhance the collection of data so that you can have a better understanding of what's happening with kids who run away. And I'm going to use that just because we haven't settled on, like what kind of language to use. But kind of connecting this quantitative data conversation to the conversation around terminology. One of the things that one of the threads that I heard really is about understanding what underlies the youth that has left their placement. And so the charge here, the directive around the quantitative data is about really answering this question as to whether or not current statewide quantitative data regarding the experiences of children who have run away from out-of-home placements is sufficient. And I know that at the last meeting, Stephanie went through the directives for this group to really ground the group in sort of like narrowly focusing on what the specific charges are. And so we're gonna dive back into this quantitative data conversation. And since I don't know about all of you, but I know from week to week, I may not remember the depth of a discussion that I had last week, let alone a month ago. So we're actually going to provide back to all of you the feedback that you provided last time around the data that you think would be most useful regarding the experiences of children and youth who run away from placement. And really identify where those gaps are. So we're gonna reshare that content back to you, specifically around the missing data. And then one of the additional questions that we want you to answer is around just beginning to think about how the missing data, the new data that you'd like to see might be collected. Again, with this goal of being able to understand the nuance of what's happening with these kids and youth, so that systems better understand and can intervene most appropriately to meet their needs. Before we go into our breakout groups, and I think Trace is going to try to reconstruct the groups that were together last time. Is that right, Trace?
Yeah, and I think the goal there really is just to continue the conversation. We got feedback last time that we didn't have enough time in the breakout groups, and we want to get more specific. So that's why we're kind of giving back to you the ideas you've already generated. We've captured those for ourselves for report purposes around what this group is really saying, but we want to make sure that you all can continue to iterate on those, either the same ideas, or maybe since you've had some time to think about this, you have additional ones. So it could be either or. Just continue on in this document that I dropped in. I know some groups are going to be smaller.
Okay, Trace froze. Oh, okay. Did she freeze for everybody or just me?
Just you.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, it's saying my internet is unstable now. Nice. So I may have to go off camera. Thank you, Trace.
No, you're good.
Sorry if I was stumbling over you.
No worries. So I was just saying that we're going to break them out into the same groups. And if you have someone missing from your group might be a little smaller, but we wanted you all to be able to continue that conversation. And again, we're not asking for you to come up with all the solutions for the data, but we do know that a variety of you have that perspective of how that you might have an idea around how that might be captured in a more meaningful way on the systems side. So you'll see a new prompt and you'll see the same prompt to either continue on or come up with new ideas around the how. So
awesome. Thank you. Before we jump in, are there any questions from the group?
Sorry, one more thing. The other thing I dropped in is that just as a reminder, if it's helpful, we sent out the materials ahead of time, which were Stephanie's presentation that does name the pieces that are collected, right, from statute purposes, and then also the presentation that CDHS brought. So if it's helpful to your conversation, those are in the email from Jordan, just as a reminder. Otherwise, you'll be in the note catcher.
Which is in the chat. The link is in the chat.
Yes, correct. Everybody good? Let's do like a thumbs up. We understand our, okay, cool. What we're gonna do is we're gonna pop around after 10 minutes to just see, we're gonna give it 10 minutes. And if everyone's kind of crickets and we feel like we've gotten everything out, we'll come back and just let groups kind of speak to any shifts they made or anything they went deeper on. And everybody's still going after 10 minutes, then we'll just come back at 5-minute intervals after that. We just, but at least 10 minutes in the groups. Okay. All right. Michael, I believe, made the breakout groups on his end. So I will let Michael break us off into groups. And if you have any questions, just feel free to chat or come back to the main room and we'll be here.
See you all in a bit.
Thanks, y'all. Michael, if you want to go ahead and open those up.
All rooms should be open.
Don't think I get it. Where do I go to the room?
Yeah, how do we get to our rooms?
Hold on, let me try closing them and open them back up.
I think we normally just get sent there, right?
Yeah.
Magically, we zoom there.
Okay, I'm just making sure I'm not missing something.
No, you're good. You're good. It's always that weird, uncomfortable moment where you're like, does everyone know something I don't?
Yeah, I was trying to wait till someone else said it, but no one popped up.
I'm waiting to be
Bear with me, technical issues.
No worries. And do folks see, Michael, I can't see it because it's not my function on my end, but typically also there's a piece at the bottom that says breakout rooms, and then folks could click on that. You could say enter room because you have been assigned to rooms. Do people see that?
No.
I think we may have to, because we've turned the breakout rooms on. Hi, technical TA IT here. I think we may have to have people jump out and jump back in because we did the settings during the meeting, which will then allow you to have the breakout setting activated. So I'll hold the call open. If everyone could just bear with us, hop off, hop back onto this link. I think that's going to activate it for everyone.
Ah, interesting.
Okay.
Let's try that. Back in.
Can we make sure we know which link? Because I don't even remember which one I came in now. I tried a couple to get in. Is it?
I'll have Trade forward the new link so everyone has it at the top of their inbox.
Okay, thank you.
Do we need to leave too?
I believe so.
Okay.
Doesn't work, Jordan. Let's just keep it full group.
Yeah. Folks seeing it as they're coming in.
It says that host has opened breakout rooms. Please wait to be assigned.
Yeah, hold on. Everybody got unassigned. I'm going to send you your invites right now.
That was my equivalent of turning it off and turning it back on.
You just blew into the Nintendo game.
Just
nice. Thanks, Michael and Jordan.
Get everyone back.
All right, Ashley. Okay, people are.
Thanks, folks, for your patience. Michael, we good?
Making my way through. I have to do it one at a time.
All right. I'm going to drop back in the note catcher and I'll come in the group as well. Make sure you click on that before you head out.
Okay, I should have invited everybody. If you didn't receive some kind of notification, you might need to sign out and come back in.
Michael, let's just pause and let's just keep it whole group, because I don't want to lose the conversation, if that's okay. So
Yeah.
no one is in a breakout group right now, right?
Oh, no.
Okay. Let's pivot, Doris, if that's okay. I'm not sure what, yeah, let's do that. So if folks could, and Doris, I'll just jump in with an idea I have, if that's okay. So if folks could jump into this note catcher that we have, I'm going to drop it one more time just in case. What I think might be helpful is let's just go down by group and share out what groups shared in the last piece. And then would love for members of that group, we'll give you a couple of minutes to share out anything in addition that you've been thinking about as it relates to this. And we can come back at the end as a full group with that second prompt, Doris. That's kind of what I'm thinking. So we'll just stick with the what's missing prompt first for each group. Make sure that we're understanding anyone's additional feedback, and then we'll ask that broader question of the how. Does that sound right, Doris?
Getting off mute. Yes, that sounds perfect.
Okay. So I'll hand it to you to kind of move through each of these groups. I'm assuming, so on the left, you'll see
The group, individuals.
Yep.
Yeah.
And let's stick with that first prompt and we'll just move through.
Yeah, so for group one, we have Chelsea, Elizabeth, Jenna, and Ashley. I'm trying to see who. Chelsea, I see you. I assume you're the same, Chelsea. Jenna, I'm becoming intimately familiar with you.
I think they're all
Hi.
I don't see Jenna.
Oh.
Elizabeth and Ashley. So we have from the last time, there's, I don't want to, restate what you included here. But again, just sort of refamiliarize yourself with what you had, and if there's some additional thoughts that you have on data that's missing that you think is really important in understanding the experiences of kids who go missing from care.
And as we're, sorry, one note, as we're waiting on folks from those particular groups, if folks in the future groups could go ahead and refamiliarize yourself with what your group wrote so that you can be thinking of anything you'd like to add to that. And you can add as you're talking directly into the note catcher, or we can capture it on our end. All right, group one, would love to hear from y'all.
Yeah, I think since we're all on like big group, it'd be great to hear your voice rather than spending the time typing it into the note catcher. Hi, Ashley, I see you come off mute.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm thinking about this in the right way, but I'll just start talking and then that'll hopefully get the juices flowing. Going not from the beginning, but kind of going down to the middle, there were some bullets here we had about getting data by facility or by county individually. I think with the idea that, some facilities are doing some things differently than others. I know that there are some general rules about what has to happen, but it does seem like, largely protocols might be the same, but we know from practice, some places do it a little bit differently. So really getting a handle on what each facility does, what tools they use would be the important first step. And then the second step to that would be kind of comparison, like, you know, are there differences in numbers of runaways after a certain tool was introduced? So this is sort of this idea of trying to find out what works and what doesn't. Are some protocols a little bit more work better than others? Are some tools working better than others? The only way you're going to know that is to know, first of all, what each facility or county or however you want to track it does first, and then you're going to want some comparative data. So I know that when we were doing the family first work, there was kind of a county-wide sort of survey to ground us and get us started. I don't know if that kind of thing is possible for this. It may already exist because these facilities are so well regulated that it may already exist. I don't know. But then within that, you know, looking at length of time. So like, even if runaways haven't, you know, youth leaving care hasn't stopped, is the time that they're gone shorter? Or data about where they're going. Like if they're running to family, they're no longer making runs to like an unsafe situation, but they are still running, but they're only running to family. I think that's important. So just this idea that it's kind of hard to know what we're even looking at when we don't have any data to compare some of these sort of nuanced things was a theme when we were speaking. And then maybe that'll get other people in the group thinking and talking.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Ashley. I want to play back some of what I heard. I think on the quantitative data collection side, really being able to disaggregate the data on at the county and the facility side, as well as in you know, getting some of that data around how long are they gone, where do they go when they leave, so that you can do some monitoring. I think around the disaggregation at the county and facility level, then being able to complement that with some of the qualitative data around, you know, what tools do they use, what are their interventions, so that you can then have a better understanding, I think it sounds like, of that nuance in terms of what are they doing about this particular challenge, and be able to, you know, potentially spread and scale things that are really effective or seem to be really effective in terms of their population served. But, you know, to start with that baseline. Awesome. Thank you. Kevin, I see that you also came off mute. Or were you not intended to?
I didn't mean to. I'm not.
All right. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi. I think one of the things that we discussed before was the numbers of kids in DHS custody versus those in family custody, because I think the experiences of those kids are vastly different from someone who's been forcibly removed from their home environment as versus someone like myself who had placed my son in residential care because of his behavioral issues. So I think the reasons those kids run are probably going to be different. I just don't know how you go about getting that information. I mean, that's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you. I mean, I think that you know, comes back to the whether or not the child or youth remains in their like sort of parents' custody and are voluntarily placed in those facilities versus kids who have been removed from their parents' custody and now in child welfare's custody. Awesome. So being able to distinguish those populations, it sounds like it's really important.
And I was just going to add, I don't remember as much about our conversation last month, so it's helpful to have the notes, but I think one piece we're missing, kind of like Elizabeth said, is why are these kids running? And so I think that's a big point in prevention, is looking at why they're running. And I know Ashley also mentioned looking at what protocols, you know, help them to come back, or what protocols help them to not run. But I think, and I like Elizabeth said also, I don't know how to gather the data, but I think at some point we need to figure out why they're running, to look at ways to prevent them from running. And then obviously look at procedures and protocols to figure out how to get them to come back and how to keep them safe. And so I don't know, I just, there's lots of data we need. I'm just not sure I know how to get it.
Yeah, I think on that, and I see that you came back off mute, Ashley, as well. I think on the why question, and I'll put this question out to the whole group, is, you know, when we think about the quantitative piece of data and wanting to be able to draw out trends and, commonalities and things like that. Do you have a sense of, in that why question, what some of the reasons might be that could begin to populate that data?
Well, I was thinking about the presentation that we just had from the lab that presented at our last big meeting. And so I think you might be, if you were going to try to tie into something, you would want to try to tie it into some of the categories I think that they identified. Frankly, I don't know that we're ever going to be able to have good data about the why, because they don't think kids truly understand the why. And so it's almost an impossibility. That's why part of me thinks where they go informs a little bit of the why, not always, but I do think that from me, when I was listening to the data presentation that we had, that seems something that was more realistic to track, and then also led to information though that was helpful that goes to the why. It may not be the full picture, of course. But yeah, I think getting to the why is a dangerous.
I think there are
I don't understand data enough to know how you get there, I guess.
Well, I agree with you, but I mean, I fostered over 80 kids, most of them are teenagers, and I've had a lot of kids who've come to me with a history of running away and then didn't run for 3 years. And so I think there are pieces of that where a change in environment or different practices and procedures can influence whether or not a kid runs.
Thank you for that. Stephanie, I see your hand raised, and then Lynette, I also saw that you you had some ideas, so we'll come to you next.
Yeah, I think that one of the things I've always wondered about, right, is we have this guidance from federal government, which obviously has been incorporated at the state level, and it requires us to keep, I think there's 5 or 6 different bullet points of information, and the data is being kept in our trails database system. The real issue is how we get it out, right? Because my understanding from a number of caseworkers and folks on my own staff is it's all in the narrative section. And so the pieces that I'm looking at, the bullet points are pretty clear, right? We're supposed to document, our efforts to locate youth, determining primary factors that contributed to the youth being absent, responding, what efforts we respond to, when they tell us what went wrong, what are we doing to actually course correct, for lack of a better word. We're also supposed to be looking at determining their experiences while they're absent from care, whether they have been victimized, what it is that they've been exposed to. So I feel like the mandate, at least a bigger outline, if you will, has already been provided to us through federal and state law and/or rules. And we know at least that caseworkers are keeping that information in trails. We don't have any way to get it out of that narrative section, right? So I guess when I think about missing data, I think about, well, let's look at what is already being captured. But more importantly, let's get it extracted and see what it does to inform us about everything from length of time gone, efforts to locate, why kids ran, et cetera. Because really our caseworkers would be the ones who would be the best connection to that in terms of system response, right? Since they're the ones who are documenting that information. So I offer that as, I think those are the missing pieces, but I also think they're available. And I would love this task force that we note that in any future report is, there is missing data, but it can be captured. It's some IT person's dream that could help us get this done.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Stephanie. And I think, so one of the challenges I think in being able to leverage the data that's captured is have it both captured and reported on in digestible ways. And so I know from my own experience working in public systems is that when the information you need is in narrative form, it is challenging to both initially and ongoing tease the data out. And so, one of the reason for my question around so what are some of the categories is that if you have it in more of a drop down, like a systematic way of capturing the data, it makes it much easier to then be able to report on it and monitor it and so forth. But I think to your point, like, I think that it is really important to be able to leverage the expertise of folks who are putting the data in, who are actually working with kids to inform what those categories might be. Lynette, I'm going to come to you, and then I want to then move to group 2, so we have time to make sure that we get to all of the groups.
Just, I have a vision. We have the sex trafficking tool in Trails. We can, through this group, recommend that a missing from care page be added to Trails. It could include whatever this group recommends. Off the top of my head, the youth's perspective on why they ran, the placement provider's perspective, and the caseworker's perspective. Because the truth is somewhere in the middle, depending on how long they've been with the placement provider or the caseworker, right? And what are the interventions and what's the plan going forward to help stabilize their placement? Make that a required part of Trails with these runaway episodes. Anything that lasts over 24 hours, if they're just gone for 2 hours, that is a waste of time. Caseworker time for sure, placement provider time. But we could get this data and do some really in-depth research on runaways if we design this page with the right questions. And I sit on CTUG, which is the Trails user group at the state, and this is not a huge ask. This is something that can be added to Trails mod. So that's my idea on how to get this information, because the only other way right now is to do a qualitative analysis of everybody's rock notes, and nobody has time for that.
And it would only then be point in time, right? Like, it's not, you know, a long-term solution. Thank you for that, Lynn. And it looks like you provided, your group talked about that a little bit last time. Awesome. So I think we're going to transition to group 2. Which included Brian, Dennis, Kevin, Renee, and Stephanie. So anything that you would add to the list that you generated last time? Hi, Renee, I see your hand raised.
Yeah.
And then you moved. Oh, there you go.
Am I on? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, your box moved for me, so then I lost track of where you were.
Got it. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think for one thing, we really need to stop talking about these kids as one homogenous group and think about the different groups within them. I mean, if I using an analogy for like trying to understand cancer, if we want to understand like what caused cancer, what the treatments worked and things like that, if we kept it all as one group of just cancer, we just wouldn't really learn that much useful. So, by breaking it down to, bladder cancer, breast cancer, leukemia, you have to do that to be able to, to have meaningful information and interventions. And I feel like the same thing is here. And I feel like this comes up frequently. People are making the point, well, there's different, types of kids. There might be a kid in a foster home who's, fairly stable mental health wise, but their family situation doesn't allow them to be there. And they might be running for a totally different reason than a kid with extreme psychiatric problems who's in a residential center. And just has trouble being stable. And so I think one thing we need to do is really start to thinking about the different groups within this category, because there's going to be really different circumstances for each contributing to leaving placements, and really different things that will be the interventions that prevent it. So I feel like the sooner we do that, the better conversations we'll have going forward, because it's just really hard to talk about this group all as one homogenous group. And then the other thing is, I think it'd be awesome to build data systems where this information is easily accessible. I think it will take too long to help what we want to do right now, because they have to be built, and then we'd have to have time go on to get the information. I do think it would be useful to do, essentially like chart reviews, picking a period of time and random sampling or whatever, or things like that, and having someone go through and pull out the data. It is labor intensive, but I do think it'd be the quickest way to get objective information rather than anecdotal and what we're all thinking or what we've heard or talking, interviewing people. I think the same could be done in some different sites, like maybe there's not that many high-end residential centers in our state, we could pick a period of time and, the running and try to do, ask for some data or chart reviews there. That might be a little tougher, but I do think some really useful information, getting at all these pieces of information that people are bringing up that are so important. I feel like that might be one of the most useful ways to actually get some true data, even though it's a bit labor intensive now. And then we could build systems for moving forward to be able to track things. But I think we want to act sooner than that data would be available.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I like the suggestion of the investment of some kind of a chart review that provides for an opportunity to better capture, who are these kids, what are their underlying reasons, how long are they gone, where do they go, like to get to be able to inform some of those the categories and just general understanding of this population. Thank you. Any others from this group? I see, Janelle, you put in the chat, is there a spike in runaway youth since the Families First Act has passed? I heard the uptick of DHS not being able to intervene has resulted in kids running from their bio home has increased. Is this real? Wondering if that data would help.
I say that because since Family First Act, I mean, we were just speaking about how there isn't a lot of residential cares right now, nor that we can put them in or things like that. And I mean, I've said this before multiple times. I'm not a huge advocate of the Families First Act. I think it was a great idea, but I think how it's actually implemented and what has resulted in it is not what anyone thought it was going to be. And so just like anything that passes, there's hiccups, but I'm wondering if that kind of data would help maybe revamp some of the holes and the problems that were put in Family First Act to help it better, because we have no placements for teens right now. And the ones that are, anytime they've been docked, so many runaways, right? Because the data that we do have, or if certain boxes are checked, they won't take them. And so it makes it even that much harder. And so I'm wondering if that data would help to show, hey, we all did this, because sometimes good intentions are the gateway to hell, I think, and we need to scale back a little bit.
Yeah, I think, being able to look at any trend data so that you can look at not just the impact of new legislation like Family First, but also, any other environmental changes like COVID. And I know that that some of you last time talked about whether there were any changes during and or after COVID. So being able to look and see if there's been any impact there. Kevin, I'm going to come to you and then to Anna.
I hope this isn't off point, but I think it's the most important point to me. We're talking a lot about data and what data we need, and I think the best thing this task force can do is, all that stuff is great, and I'm for all of it, and I agree with everything everyone said, to see what we can do to stop the run. Right now, we have a system where we have people going on TV and saying kids have rights, and therefore they essentially can run away, and there's nothing we can do, and staff can't stop them. And yet these same kids that all have, we're all about trauma-informed care, but we're still not going to tolerate if they beat up another kid. We're not going to tolerate if they bring drugs in a facility. We're not going to tolerate if they bring a weapon in a facility. We're not going to tolerate if they put holes in the wall. There's charges for all those. And I think the first job one is to put runaways closer to that category where a parent or the system has placed you here, and running away is not an acceptable response. And once we get there, I think it's going to lead us in a lot better direction than trying to get the right therapy or that kind of a thing. What can we do? And if it means physically, well, it means physically. But what can we do to stop runaways? And I think it's a facility by facility thing. I don't think that, that you can do the same thing in foster care that you can do in a Ridgeview type situation, obviously. But until we start there, where we put runaway with these other types of categories, where in spite of trauma-informed care, this is just something we as a society can't accept, we're not going to get the bulk of the problem done.
Thank you for that, Kevin. There was a clarifying question in the chat around whether you're ultimately asking for more accountability.
I don't know what the question means. Am I asking for more accountability? I'm asking for the system to say we're not going to accept kids running the same way we tell them we're not going to accept you beating up another kid in the facility. So I guess so. I don't know what the question means.
It was me, Kevin. This is Janelle. I was just saying, are you asking for more accountability from the children? Are you asking for more accountability of the system? Because it kind of seems like things got off the rails is what you're saying, and we just need to kind of rein it back in. Is that kind of what you're trying to say? I'm just trying to be clarifying.
Well, I feel like we're running in a direction we're not going to be as effective than what I see as the 900-pound gorilla in the room. We have a system right now where kids have rights and we don't consider an emergency, therefore there's not much we can do and we can't touch them. I mean, I can tell my last story where my son was allowed to walk away from a facility with trained personnel on each side of him. One's name was Jason Lane, who was no longer allowed to touch him. Okay, he walked away. He ended up running to a gang house. He got shot at. He was involved in crime. He ended up with a major altercation in Los Angeles with the police. And yet he was, and the system put $10,000 or more into trying to find him. And yet he was just allowed to walk away when that could have easily been managed by trained personnel. All right. That's the type of thing that's got to stop. We just can't let these kids walk away. We just can't do it. And if we can get 60% of the problem done by whatever it takes, physical constraints, by what we put in our facilities, by fencing, by whatever we do, then we can work on the last 40% with all these other ideas.
Thank you for that. We had some additional chatter in the chat. Renee, I want to come to you, but then I want to make sure that we have time for the other two groups.
Hey, Doris, can I jump in real quick? Sorry.
Sure.
Just one quick comment, Kevin, because I remember hearing from you in the last meeting as well on that, and I appreciate your point around the, you know, and what folks are saying around the elephant in the room. The only point I just want to make, I'm just putting my facilitator hat on real quick, is that we have to address each directive in the statute, right, as a task force. That is like that is a we have to piece. So while it's kind of like we have to go slow to go fast in some of these pieces, I just want to name that's also an elephant for me, is like being able to specifically address these directives, which people might want to go fast on these other pieces, and I understand, and it's we have to stop and make sure we're addressing each of these pieces with fidelity. So I just want to remind us of that. I know you know that, but I want to keep that in our mind so that folks don't feel like, well, where are we going here? We're not talking about the issues we really want to talk about. So hopefully we can kind of tidy up this conversation as it relates to this directive, and then like you're kind of insinuating, it is to move on, right, and get to those topics. So just wanted to name that for you, Kevin, if that's helpful, and for the group. Thanks, Doris. Sorry.
Thank you for that, Trace. No worries. We're going to go to Renee, and then we're going to go to group 3.
Yeah, I mostly put my comment in the chat, but I just think what Kevin brings up is really a perfect example, is where it's really hard to talk about these kids all as one homogenous group. I think, Kevin, you're talking about kids who are in a facility that could have a locked perimeter versus somebody who's in just a foster home where it's just a family home, if I'm understanding you correctly. So I feel like, you know, there's just such different categories of kids here and types of placements that, you know, that to me, that's just an example of where it's kind of hard unless we say like, okay, for this group, this, for this group, something else.
Yeah, and so like really being able to drill down is important, and so that you can understand and sort of pull apart what are the experiences and then needs of the different categories of youth. We're going to move to group 3 again, just to see if there's any additional missing data that you would like to see that would inform the experiences of these kids. And this group was Becky, Brandon, Jana, Lynette, and Janelle.
Well,
I
we
kind
have
of wrote a bunch of
a
stuff,
little bit.
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
We'll
Janelle.
go with,
You go first.
I was gonna say, go with Lynette and then Janelle.
Mine will be shorter. Not that I don't have 100,000 ideas. They're not all that important to today. There is definitely some stuff that we can do trails wise to get more accurate information about how many runaways and the length of runaway episodes when they're missing from care. I'm going to work on that language. Because right now, one of the barriers is that child welfare is able to pay for the bed for up to 7 days to keep it, but you cannot change it to a runaway status in trails until after that 7 days and pay to hold the bed. We need to recommend, this would be my idea, is to recommend that they enter a category on the run bed hold into trails so that you can differentiate it. In case child welfare can differentiate in trails that we're still paying for the bed, but we could then pull the data that this is an actual missing episode and how actually long it is. Because you could have kids that run away for 3 or 4 days and then come back to placement and it never shows that they were missing from care.
Thank you for that, Lynette.
Okay.
So I think that we need to make sure that we give time for public comment. Is that right, Trace? Are we going to leave any time for public comment?
We don't have any public comment that I'm seeing, but we do have a couple of business items to wrap up. So if you want to kind of wrap up, you talk about what I just said in the survey and the opportunity there, and then we'll move into some business items real quick.
Awesome. Because we want to make sure that we let you all out on time. So what we would like for you to do is we're going to send out a post-meeting survey. We know that this is our first interim meeting and want to provide you with not the last opportunity, but we won't want to put to bed this quantitative data conversation. But if you could provide in the survey any additional missing data that you think will be helpful in furthering this conversation in the survey, that would be really helpful. And I think I'm turning it back over to you, Trace.
Thanks, Doris. Okay, so there's a couple things. One, we're going to need to do for the purposes of the report, we do want to be able to say it specifically to this directive of if the quantitative data is sufficient for the experiences of kids who have run from care, and it's a simple yes or no poll. And so Jordan is going to, mostly because we want to just capture again data from the group of X amount of folks feel like, yes, the data that is present is sufficient, or no, it's not. I think I have an idea of how most folks would answer this, but we want to make sure that we give the opportunity. So Jordan's going to run that poll real quick. Jordan, if you want to go ahead, that should just take.
I would love to run the poll, but I think doing the breakout rooms remove my settings. So I'm wondering if everyone can quickly in the chat just answer yes or no to that question, and I'll keep a log of it that way. So Zoom is great today.
So Jordan, if you want to drop in the question that you would have put in that poll, and then it's a simple yes or no for folks, and you'll have opportunity in the survey to provide any context you'd like to provide to your answer. But for now, it's just a yes or no in the chat. And we'll give about 30 seconds for folks to do that. And the prompt might have gotten lost too up there, so I'll just read it out loud. Is current statewide quantitative data regarding the experiences of children who have run away from out-of-home placement sufficient? Yes or no? I think we're still waiting on a few folks. I'll follow up with you one-on-one if I have to. So if you're not comfortable putting it in here. All right, the second thing I want to name before we close out is I was just sitting here putting while Doris was leading that second conversation. I think the way I want to wrap up what I'm hearing in that first part of the conversation around runaway, if I were you, asking, okay, where did we land? What I think I heard, what I heard from the group is a middle ground around this person first language, right? So not trying to land on a specific children missing from care, but instead a child who has run away as an example, right? So this group is setting the priority of ensuring that we use language as person first. In this case, it is the child. And so you'll see that reflected as we continue to generate the report and as we also talk around these kids in this group. And so just kind of want to name that that's the theme that I heard from folks. If you disagree with that, please give us that feedback in the survey. But as I was kind of going through everyone's feedback, it seemed like that's what folks were most comfortable on. But I would love a quick kind of thumbs up or thumbs down, just so that I can see if folks would agree with that quick summary of how we're thinking around the language piece. Cool. Okay. All right. Again, if you have any specific feedback that you're not comfortable sharing right now, just put that in the survey and I'm happy to follow up in a one-on-one, but it seems like that's a good place to land for us as a group. Okay. Last piece, I'm going to drop in this exit survey. The thing I want to name is that also just kind of came out of this conversation is in this next meeting, what's clear to me is that we need to be sure that we're conveying to you all kind of the roadmap as we see it right now. Kind of, Kevin, to the point I just made around, let's not forget the directives we're answering, but also where we're going and that we are getting there. So we'll do a better job in the next meeting of laying out a roadmap in a way that can help you see where those conversations are going to be happening because they are. And then you'll have an opportunity to give feedback around the way that we're thinking about that. So, we've got a kind of a curriculum, if you will, a roadmap that we're laying out to get where we need to go to address all of these directives we have. So I think it might be helpful for the group to just see that so that when those conversations are coming. So we'll do that in the next meeting and you'll have a chance to respond to that and make sure that you're holding us accountable to get where we need to go as a group. All right. Okay. Surveys in the chat. Really, really appreciate we read each one of those. Super helpful to give us that feedback. And so thank you for taking a minute or two to provide that for us. Stephanie, as chair, any closing words before we send folks on their way?
No, just thank you all. I appreciate you taking the time and being so thoughtful. Really, it's super enriching conversation. So I appreciate you all. Thank you.
See you folks. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Have a great day, everyone.